Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is on understanding the connections between fractions, decimals and percentages, which is a topic that many people find challenging in my experience. Maybe it's because often at school the three concepts were taught separately, or things were a bit rushed, or there's just so many rules, it felt a bit complicated. There's so many reasons. But really, fractions, decimals, and percentages are different ways of showing the same thing. And once you start to see how they fit together, it starts to make a bit more sense. So fractions, decimals, and percentages are all ways of representing proportion, which is basically where we compare one part with the whole. So this cake here was a whole, and we can compare how much is left of it as a fraction. Like I can see there are 7 out of 8 parts left. For example, on your phone, you can see how much battery you have as a percentage. So 100% is a full or a whole battery. Anything less than that is part of the whole. And with money, decimals, we think in terms of whole pounds. So any decimals represent something less than a pound or between whole pounds. So for example, £1.62 represents 1 whole pound, and then 62p, which is part of a whole pound. So why is it actually useful to understand the links between fractions, decimals and percentages? Well, they pop up everywhere in real life. So think shopping, discounts, interest rates, recipes, splitting bills or costs. They're just all over the place. Being able to switch between them helps you compare, estimate and make sense of numbers quickly. And this will be so helpful when it comes to developing other skills, and you'll be able to adapt the way you approach exam questions to a way that suits you. So mastering this skill is going to give you more confidence and put you in control of the maths. So let's now look at some visuals that can help us understand. So this grid here represents a whole, and it's been split into 100 smaller squares, which we call hundredths. So if you didn't know already, percent literally means out of 100. So you could also think of each little square as being 1%, and the whole grid is 100%. Or you could think of it as being split into 10 rows of 10 or 10 columns of 10. And we call these tenths. The place value diagram, which is here, can show how we can sort of represent diagrams using decimals, and the number line gives us a sense of part versus whole as well. So let's now look at some examples. So on these diagrams, we've got whole columns or whole rows shaded. And remember that a whole row or column can be considered a tenth of the whole, as there are 10 of them. So in the first diagram, I've got one whole column shaded. I've got no full grids shaded, but I've got one whole column, which is a tenth. So this first grid represents 0.1. Or I could also say I've got 1 out of 10 columns shaded. If I was going to kind of count the hundredths, so the smaller squares, I've got 10 shaded out of 100 altogether. And because remember that percent means out of 100, 10 out of 100 could be written as 10%. So on a number line, this diagram here would be represented here, so 0.1 or 1/10. Moving on to the next diagram, I've got 3 rows shaded, so that's no full grids but 3/10. So I would say that's 0.3, or I could say I've got 3 out of 10 rows shaded, or if I was to count all the single squares, I've got 30 shaded out of 100, and because percent means out of 100, that is then going to be 30%. And 3/10 or 0.3 is represented on the number line just here. And finally, the last diagram, I've got 9 columns, so no full grids again, but 9/10. So that's 0.9, or 9 columns out of 10 shaded, or again, if you were to count the smaller squares, the hundredths, there would be 90 out of 100, which then means it's going to be 90%. And on the number line, we would represent that just here. On this grid, just 1 out of the 100 smaller squares is shaded. So on my place value chart, again, I've got no full grids shaded. I've got no rows or columns shaded, so I'm going to put a 0 in the 10ths column. But I've got 1 smaller square, 1/100th shaded, so I'm going to put a 1 here. So as a decimal, this grid here represents 0.01. As a fraction, I could say I've got 1 out of 100 small squares shaded. And so as a percentage, then that would be 1%, which literally translates as 1 out of 100. And if I wanted to think of where that would go on a number line, it's going to be between sort of 0 and 1/10, which is going to be this part of the number line here. If you look at the next number line, that's a sort of zoomed in version of between 0 and 0.1. And as you can see, 0.01 would be here. So hopefully that kind of gives you a sense of the size of the number. So on the first number line, it would go sort of right around here, really close to 0, around there, 0.01. Then on this example, we have got, again, no full grids shaded, so a 0 in here. We've got 4 columns shaded, so that would be 4/10, and then also 3/100ths shaded as well. So as a decimal, that would be 0.43. If we wanted to write it as a fraction, we could say we've got 43 of the small squares shaded out of 100, which means as a percentage, then I would write that as 43%. And on my number line, that decimal is between 4/10 and 5/10. So it sort of would be around here. If I just put an arrow there, 0.43, between 4 and 5/10, but closer to 4/10. This example is a little bit different. So if we think of kind of these diagrams as representing kind of just one number, we've actually got a full grid shaded on the left. So in my place value diagram, I'm going to put a 1 here to show I've got 1 full grid. Then on the next part, I've got 3 columns, so that would be 3/10, and I've also got 4/100ths there shaded as well. So as a decimal, this diagram represents 1.34. As a fraction, I could write this in a couple of different ways actually. I could say either that I've got one whole grid, and I've also got 34 out of 100 shaded as well. That's called a mixed fraction or a mixed number. Or I could write it differently. I could just think, of it as just counting the smaller squares. So I've got 100 small squares on the left diagram and then 34 on the right diagram. So altogether, I've got 134, and they're called hundredths. That's what we call an improper fraction or a top-heavy fraction. And as a percentage, I've got 100% of this first diagram is shaded, of the first grid, and I've got 34% of the second one shaded. So altogether, that gives me 134%. So what I'd recommend for this slide is to just pause the video for a couple of minutes, have a go at writing down what decimal, fraction and percentage these two grids represent, and also have a go at sort of working out roughly where they would be represented on the number line. And then when you're ready, play the video and you can go through the answers. Okay, so we'll go through the answers now. So the first grid, we've got no full grids shaded. We've got 2/10 and 9/100. So that's 0.29, 29 out of 100, and 29%. And we would represent that number just around here on the number line, 0.29. For the second one, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tenths, again no full grids, and 2/100. So that is 0.72 or 72 out of 100, which is then 72%. And on the number line, that would be marked around here, just between 7 and 8 tenths, 0.72. And then finally, this place value diagram just kind of helps us to connect and think about the sort of different values within a number. So as you can see, the ones, that's like the full shaded square or the full grid. The tenths, that's like 1 out of 10 parts of the grid, and then hundredths is 1 out of 100 parts of the grid. And then that could also help us to think about what thousandths would be. So it's quite difficult to show a visual for that, but thousandth would be 1 out of 1,000 parts of the grid. And we can also think about moving kind of left. If ones, that's like a whole grid, then tens would be kind of 10 lots of that whole grid, and hundreds would be 100 lots of the whole grid. So that's kind of getting bigger as we move to the left, as opposed to getting much smaller as we move to the right. So I hope that this helped you to start to see how fractions, decimals and percentages all connect as different ways of showing the same idea. Keep practicing with visuals and soon these links will feel much more natural. If you found this helpful, don't forget to like the video or subscribe to the channel. There's plenty more to come to help you build confidence with everyday maths. So thank you for watching and goodbye.